Excuse me.
Please take your seats.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Rather, good evening. We are already a little late, but given the significance of the topic, connectivity is a huge issue. I can really look at today, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. I don't want to go into details about what is connectivity and all that. Depending upon their presentations, maybe in the end I'll make a few comments. But just to kind of warm you up, if you really look at as a teacher, I teach several things, including connectivity in the Indo-Pacific. So connectivity is basically three types. One is physical connectivity, the other one is the institutional connectivity, the third is people-to-people connectivity. So in the physical connectivity, again, we have four types. Of course, road connectivity, rail connectivity, air connectivity, and sea connectivity. So broadly, this connectivity, as an issue. Physical connectivity in the Indo-Pacific, really look at physical connectivity has historically played an extremely important role in. Not many of us realize that connectivity of India with the rest of East Asia and all the going up to China to to an extent even Okinawa. One can trace those routes back to 2,500 years. If you really look at the history of India's interactions with East Asia, especially Southeast Asia, almost 2,500 years back, there are three major ports, but out of three, one most important port is in Andhra Pradesh. Two are in Andhra Pradesh. One is Kalingapatnam towards the north, and then Machilipatnam, from where he comes from, and further down Nagapatnam, which is in Tamil Nadu. But the most important of these three ports was Masulipatnam. That used to be what used to be called. That was the point from where Buddhism traveled all the way to Southeast Asia. That's the point from where the huge Indian influence traveled along with the traders. It was the traders who took religion, culture, language, literature. If you really look at those of you familiar with East Asia, in almost every walk of life, you see something or the other of Indian cultural influence, and you simply choose. And that because of the sea connectivity, that really played that role. If only we didn't have that connectivity, probably we wouldn't have 3 or 4 countries named with Sanskrit names in Southeast Asia, from Indo to Indonesia. Indo is India, Indonesia, group of islands, to Cambodia, Cambodia has become. We all know Singapore, we all know Myanmar, the old Burma, Brahmadesa, which became Burma and then Myanmar. So you can see huge influence Indian influence, thanks to the connectivity that was established in the ancient times. That in a way got disrupted due to colonialism. But if you come to modern times, you see connectivity again playing a significant role in. Starting from, if you really look at, Japan took the lead, in fact, in terms of connectivity. When they started post Second World War, the port-led development, creation of, the development of ports and special economic zones and as a connecting centers with the rest of East Asia, with the rest of the world. And then followed by, many other Southeast Asian countries, Singapore, for instance, one of the largest ports in the world. And of course, much later, China. Really look at, Shenzhen, which was a small little town 40 years back. Today's its GDP is more than 100 billion. I mean, the kind of activity Shenzhen port has created over the years. If you really think about hardware, electronics hardware, that is a hub. It's a global hub. You get every possible thing there. I don't want to go into details, but connectivity has really played an extremely significant role in the development of in the rise of East Asia. If you really look at more recently, due to 3 major reasons, connectivity has acquired an extra significance. Very recently, if you really look at there's certain major mega trends one notices in East Asia, in the larger Indo-Pacific region. One is thanks to globalization. The export-led development has forced the countries to cooperate more and more. Today, Indo-Pacific is trading itself with more with itself than with the rest of the world at 58%. So that is been rising, is going to rise further with all the trade disputes between China and USA. China will be forced to look at other markets, and if really look at large and emerging markets, are in East Asia, are in the Indo-Pacific. India is one big market; it's still emerging. Southeast Asia, with nearly 600 million population, is another mega market that's emerging. China is still growing; it's not over yet, despite slowdown and all that talk. And you can see that the dynamism. Okay, that is really driving the East Asian rise is the issue of connectivity. The vast amounts of money are being spent in terms of infrastructure development, connectivity. China is alone, like BRI, if you really take Belt and Road Initiative, China has plans to spend altogether about $1 trillion. Never in the history any country, including martial law, really pales in front of $1 trillion. What the USA did after Second World War. And US, somebody was mentioning about US-India, cooperation, Asia-Africa growth corridor. That's about 35 billion. Nothing much has happened so far, but there's huge potential. You can go into the details about the connectivity. If you really look at China's connectivity, physical connectivity, the border trade between Yunnan province and the mainland, three countries, is more than 95 billion. I mean, how connectivity, is playing such a major role in not only getting the countries together, but as a key driver of regional economic dynamism in the Indo-Pacific. So to any number of issues, one can go into details about how connectivity and infrastructure development are of pivotal significance to the Indo-Pacific region. Since I have not looked at their papers, I don't want to preempt them from making their presentations. Once the presentations are over, maybe time permitting, I'll make a few more remarks in the end. Okay, roughly about 15 minutes each. Okay, so we'll have some time for discussion after that. Yeah, please. Who wants to go first?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, please go.
Good evening, everyone. The advantage of speaking at the last session is that today we have established the significance of Indo-Pacific region. So having said that, I would straight away jump to what this session is about, which is connectivity, and the importance of connectivity, and the increasing importance of connectivity in the Indo-Pacific region. In the inaugural session, the Honorable Secretary has very rightly pointed out that the concept of Indo-Pacific has been in usage, but what actually has changed is the world around it. So let's see how the world has changed around it. The rise of China is a very significant aspect which has affected the Indo-Pacific region, and China's initiative, China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has taken infrastructure investment into focus, through which it is trying to extend its influence in different Asian countries around the Indo-Pacific region. As a result of which, what China has done is that it has increased the importance of infrastructure investment, and it has increased the importance of what connectivity and the influence that China can bring through connecting its infrastructure with the neighboring regions. As a result of which, this has compelled the other countries around this particular region to change their stance they change their foreign policy stance in this region. The second one is the United States rebalance to Asia strategy, which has changed, whereby which it has increased the strategic importance of India in this particular region. Owing to the geographic centrality of India and its huge infrastructural gap, the strategic importance of India within the Indo-Pacific region has increased tremendously. India falls in the midst of the expansive trade routes, and the infrastructural gap that India has to offer, the investment that India can take into consideration, increases the importance of India in the eyes of the investing countries around India. Therefore, this increases the importance of India within the market it has to offer. The trade that India has to offer basically increases India's importance in the Indo-Pacific region. Having said that, India's policy is accordingly changing towards this particular region. India's neighborhood policy, India's neighborhood first policy, India's Actist policy, these are the policy changes that India has brought about within its foreign policy to synergize its synergize its strategic engagement with its neighboring countries. In the midst of this, it is important, under these circumstances, it is important for India to modernize its economy. Therefore, India is also following a development strategy whereby which India is trying to develop its manufacturing hub to increase its relevance within this particular region. So this brings us to the idea that Indian policy of strategic engagement is quite aligned with India's development strategy, and in this strategic engagement, I would like to point out in my presentation that Japan plays a very significant role in bringing about connectivity, in bringing about India's regional connectivity within the Indo-Pacific span. India's development strategy involves three steps, which is economic prosperity of India. First, to bring about economic prosperity of India. Second is infrastructural investment within India to meet the infrastructural gap that India has. Then to increase connectivity with the rest of the country, to increase its economic prosperity, India has to connect itself with its adjoining region, to bring about regional connectivity, to increase its infrastructural connectivity with the rest of the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Under economic prosperity, there is a decline in India's exports. So therefore, in order to make India a manufacturing hub, it has to increase its export. It has to increase its power to export goods to other countries. As a result of which, India is trying to realize its potential through its manufacturing hub through Make in India initiative. In the Make in India initiative, it is trying to increase its contribution of manufacturing in the GDP by 25% from the current figure of 16%. Under this initiative, India is trying to develop economic corridor, which is through which it is trying to optimize the efficiency of freight passenger corridors, economic corridors, and freight corridor, and the critical infrastructural gap through roads and railways that India has. Another important initiative is its port connectivity, its development of port connectivity, through which India is trying to, as our chair has pointed out, develop its port infrastructure so that India could connect itself with the rest of the adjoining countries in this particular region. In this effort of India to develop its infrastructure, Japan plays a very significant role. India has developing 5 industrial corridor, which is Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, Chennai-Bangalore Industrial Corridor, Bangalore-Mumbai Economic Corridor, Amritsar-Kolkata Economic Corridor, and East Coast Economic Corridor, which makes a quadrilateral within India. This is a quadrilateral corridor that we will see in the following slide. Japan is extensively investing in the development of the economic corridor within India. Japan is also extensively investing in the development of the connectivity between these corridors through its Mumbai-Ahmedabad bullet train project. Japan is investing extensively in the Delhi-Mumbai infrastructure corridor, where JICA is investing in the Western Dedicated Freight Train Corridor. It is also investing in the Chennai-Bangalore industrial corridor, where JICA has pointed out 25 priority projects, and its master plan revolves around Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh. Japan is also investing in Vizag-Chennai Industrial Corridor, which is a part of East Coast Economic Corridor that links Kolkata to Chennai. The ADB has approved project loans of around 500 million and the program loans of 125 million in this particular region, in this particular corridor. The next initiative of India is to develop its port so that it could connect with the rest of the world and take advantage of it being a sea-laden country. The Sagarmala initiative, through Sagarmala initiative, India has identified more than 200 connectivity projects, and in this particular area, India is seeking the help of different multilateral banks, and ADB is apparently it is envisaged that ADB is apparently going to play a key role in this initiative. The port infrastructural linkages will boost. It has been estimated that the port infrastructural linkages will boost India's export market by 110 billion by 2025 and create millions of jobs. This picture tries to identify what the connectivity that India is planning within India. It identifies the major cities that India is planning to establish, the major ports, and the industrial corridor and the freight corridor, and the Japan's investment in helping to develop the infrastructure in India's infrastructure. Having said that, we come to how India would help to connect itself with the rest of with its adjoining region. So, it is important for it to extend its influence to the adjoining region. It is important for India to develop its connectivity, its connection with the other countries within the Indo-Pacific region, stretching from Africa to East Asia. India's initiative towards this infrastructural connectivity with its neighborhood can be identified by 5 projects: the trilateral project and the transit project with Myanmar, the road project that India has developed with Myanmar, Chabahar Port, and International North-South Transport Corridor. In this particular region, Japan is again have agreed to fund the national highway, the Northeast Road Connectivity and fund the Northeast Road Connectivity Improvement Project, which complements India's connectivity to Thailand and Myanmar, which straight away stretches India's reach to the ASEAN region. Japan, as far as Chabahar Port is concerned, it has been identified in 2016 that in a joint statement, the Foreign Minister of Japan has said that they would be willing to collaborate with India in the development of Chabahar Port. So Japan is not only collaborating with India to increase its internal connectivity. It is also they are looking forward towards collaborating with India in increase the connectivity in the external front as well. This particular slides try to show India's point of view of how it would go about to gain its influence in the Indo-Pacific region, starting with its neighbor, stretching out to the ASEAN region, and then further to the East Asian region, and then furthering its influence or its connectivity initiative to the Indo-Pacific region as a whole. India is also collaborating with Japan, not in the development of ports in different in the adjoining countries as well. India is planning to invest in Bangladesh in the port development in Bangladesh. Japan, Myanmar, and Thailand are jointly constructing new ports in Dawai, where India is also expected to play a role. India and Japan will expand an existing small scale port in Trichonamally. This particular slide shows the strategic aspect of India's infrastructural investment, and India and Japan's infrastructural investment in the Indo-Pacific region, which it is doing as it has been established by many of the speakers in today's session to hedge China's investment in the Indo-Pacific span. Having said that, this brings us to the main vision of India and Japan in the Indo-Pacific region, which is the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. India has been the beneficiary of Japan's extended partnership for quality infrastructure. India has so as a result of which they both have come up with this pragmatic vision of investing in the Indo-Pacific region and extending their investment to the African continent, where the central idea of this particular vision is to combine India's understanding of the African market and Japan's technological know-how to increase its influence, increase its connectivity in this particular region, stretching from East Asia to Africa. In this particular initiative, India and Japan together are bringing about is a confluence. It's bringing about a confluence of India's Africa policy, Japan's Act East policy, and Japan's policy of extended partnership quality of infrastructure, and Japan's Africa policy together to increase their business opportunities and influence in the Indo-Pacific region. With AAGC, it brings me to the conclusion of my presentation here today, whereby I would like to conclude and say that there was an art historian, namely Okakura Kazuko, who has visioned Asia as one theory. And India's geographic centrality and infrastructural gap is acting as a catalyst to in India's development strategy to turn it into an important and strategic country in this particular span. As a result of which, as it has been alluded by EAM Sushma Swaraj in the Raisina dialogue back in 2016, that connectivity is something which is already in India's DNA, and which it has been, and it lies in its legacy of in the message of Buddha and spice route, which is exactly what India is trying to reiterate in the current scenario, where it's trying to align its development strategy of infrastructural development within India with that of its connectivity with an infrastructural development around India, with this idea in mind, it is trying to enhance its strategic engagement with its neighboring countries. And in this effort, Japan plays a very strategic role, by which they are trying to integrate Indo-Pacific region or the Asian region into a one singular space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chandrali, for that comprehensive presentation. A couple of quick remarks, one is, Asia as one, I thought it was, Okakura Tenshin, not, the one who came to Calcutta and had interactions with Tagore and all that. And it was Tenshin Okakura. Okay, who wrote that book, Asia as One, and, that's why. Anyway, that is a minor
Same
detail.
gentleman. He's got the two names. It's the same gentleman. It's the same gentleman.
Oh, it's the same one?
Yeah.
He had two names?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. So both are right, Coming back to, your major presentation about, infrastructure development, two parts. One is Japanese, India's own efforts at developing its infrastructure, and then jointly with Japan beyond India. See, if you really look at, you didn't mention the details, but Japan's ODA has played such a major role in the infrastructure development. You go to any city in India, wherever there's metro, you see Japanese, stamp there. Delhi metro is one of the most popular, metros in India, in Delhi, of course. And, thanks to Japanese, generous aid, So you can see that, not just physical infrastructure, but even social and human infrastructure, Japanese ODA has played. They have given nearly 32 billion so far. Committed is nearly 50 billion. We have not fully made use of that. But unfortunately, some of the projects you mentioned, they all seem very nice on the slides and all that. DMIC is one good example. It's been hanging fire for last how many years? When was this? Almost 15 years back it was proposed. The progress on the ground is so tardy, so slow. Nobody knows when it's going to really materialize, excepting a few pockets in Rajasthan and otherwise land acquisition problems, all sorts of problems it is facing. One good example is I still remember one of the major drivers of the DMIC project was the uninterrupted quality supply of power. So under which 4 gas powered power stations were supposed to come up. All of them after several, almost a decade later, all of them have been scrapped. And the reason they gave official reason was that gas supply is uncertain. I mean, didn't you realize that when you really planned this and Gas Authority of India was given all the tasks and blah blah all that. And related to that is, we didn't mention the details about, the dedicated freight corridor. That's a backbone to, DMIC. Without corridor, without proper transportation, especially, faster movement of goods, a growth corridor will never, it can never realize its full potential. And, the freight corridor is absolutely in shambles. Absolutely, nobody knows, when it will take off. These are some of the issues. Unfortunately, Japanese had been extremely enthusiastic. DMIC, initially it was Government of India, Japan got, DFC, Japan got involved and generously, they're funding it. But progress on the ground, it's not really encouraging. Similarly, you mentioned about 4 growth corridors, except in DMIC, which has made some progress. The Chennai, Karnataka, Bangalore industrial corridor, 8 years back, the cabinet took a decision to start that. Thanks to Japanese came out with all the blueprints and all that. They were willing to finance. They were willing to even to build first expressway, 8-lane expressway and all that. It got caught up with the bureaucracy and all that, and it has made zero progress. Forget about other corridors. Mumbai, Bangalore and Calcutta, South. So that is the problem, unfortunately. All the plans are fine on the paper, but when you actual comes to implementation and realizing, it's extremely poor record. That's one of the reasons why, I wonder. For instance, you mentioned about Africa, Asia-Africa growth corridor, Japanese idea. They came up and, you have old, contacts with Africa. You can use, NRIs in Africa, your political contacts, and we can use our technology and our, money power. We can together, in a way compete with China, at least provide an alternative to China's BRI. But so far, not a single project under that has been undertaken. I don't know. I wonder. No, Abe kept out of BRI, the 17 May conference in Beijing, But Abe last October said, he said, we are willing to join BRI. If Japan joins the BRI, so what will happen to, Asia-Africa corridor? I don't know. I wonder, Okay, so these are some of the issues as a scholar probably should go into, look at these issues a bit more critically and objectively. Probably that gives a lot more weight to your research. I'm sorry, I had to go into a little bit more into details, but I've been following this a little bit more closely. Thank you. Okay. Sandeep?
Good evening. My title is China's Connectivity Projects in the Indian Ocean Region and Responses. When I say responses, obviously it means India's responses. So my focus will be on the East African coast and the North Arabian Sea region of the Indian Ocean. I will briefly highlight the development of Chinese activity in the region in the last 2 decades and also bring out the Chinese interests and influence. This includes MSR, the string of pearls. Following that, India's initiatives and policy options will be touched upon. This will be the primary focus. And yeah, this is the map. Thank you, Google. Area and focus. And this is the Maritime Silk Route. Part of Xi's ambitious Belt and Road initiative includes ports in Gwadar and Djibouti. Since we are speaking about one particular region, I'm mentioning these 2 ports. And this is a map of the Belt and Road initiative. There's the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Route. And there's a string of pearls. The red dots on this map indicate ports that has Chinese stake. So this is something which is critical to take note of. And hence, string of pearls becomes more important for us. Let me just pause for a while so that you can observe this particular map for a few more seconds. Yeah. Yes. And This area is critical to protect China's energy security, and operations 4,000 nautical miles away from the mainland coast needed logistical support, and hence Djibouti happened. And China's interest and influence in East Africa, this is how the development happened. This is more like a brief timeline. China's influence in Africa, with increasing interest, there was a need to check the choke points, which are the Strait of Hormuz, Bab al-Mandab, and the Cape. And as I mentioned earlier, this area is critical to protect China's energy security, and operations 4,000 nautical miles away from the mainland coast needed logistical support, and hence Djibouti happened. Continuing with the same head, the East African nations where China has heavily invested include Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. Investments in infrastructure, telecommunication, agriculture, and also securing markets for Chinese goods. This has been the priority. Significant political influence. We can take the example of Zimbabwe. When Mugabe, there was a coup, and there was a Chinese hand in that. There was a Reuters report on that. And there is also increasing military supplies to African countries to support the defense industrial complex of PRC. And these are some developments. African nations still choose Chinese fund despite the cost because of the limited compliance. So when the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was formed, there was this debate, Washington consensus versus Beijing consensus. So nations opted for AIB and Chinese fund. They go for the Silk Road Fund because the terms and conditions that they don't have a lot of restrictions or compliance for borrowing. So hence, the African nations find it easier to borrow from China than, say, World Bank or IMF or ADB. But the catch is the lending rates are higher. And these are some of the developments. I'll just leave it for you to read. So the Rwanda and China African Development Fund MOU to accelerate joint ventures. China pledged nearly $40 million US dollars to Tanzania for security cooperation, industrialization, mining, and agriculture. Kenya and Uganda seeking Chinese funds for railway projects. So that talks are still going on. And what are the challenges for China? Concerns over lending rates and debt burden. That is a major concern. A lot of countries have come out expressing their concerns over the lending rates of China and the debt burden. Classic example, Hambantota and Colombo Port Trust. And US factor in the region. US is still has a strong presence in MENA, and also they have a base in Bahrain. And for China, there is a jurisdiction overreach. That is also a challenge. And there is also a possibility of a domestic unrest or violent conflict in the region. This might sound absurd, but I somehow get a sense, I can't substantiate this with enough proof or any development which has materialized, but this is just an assumption, and you can consider that as well. So in the past, China has always tried to stay away from conflict zones. Afghanistan is a classic case before 2014 because of the US presence across its border, and there could be a similar possibility in the African region, and that could check China's influence, and there might be a third-party involvement to make this possible. And these are India's options. The Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, this has already been discussed. This is a cooperation between India and Japan. And the Quad, India, US, Australia, and Japan. The Quad, although we could explore more possibility. There is a lot of scope for the Quad. Currently, the Malabar exercise goes on, and this could be expanded into anti-piracy patrols, and also maintaining law and order and holding the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on Law of Seas. And these could be some of the objectives for the Quad. And also disaster management. So there are a lot of avenues for cooperation within the Quad. And Chabahar and Dukum. So Dukum port is something which we've gained access, which is in Oman. Chabahar, of course, the challenge is the US sanctions over Iran. That remains to be a challenge. And why Chabahar is important is because Afghanistan comes into the picture, and again the UN Convention on Law of Seas for landlocked nations. There are articles for that, and the Quad could also bring in compliance of that particular article, which gives rights to landlocked states. So Chabahar could be brought into the equation of Quad too. This is obviously, I'm thinking out of the box. And AAGC, this is an Indo-Japan initiative, African integration with India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Oceania. Develop institutional mechanism for connecting businesses, people, and think tanks. Connectivity projects supplemented with quality infrastructure. Collective commitment to sustainable development goals. These are some of the general outline, the principles on which the AAGC is based on. And one important point which I wanted to elaborate on is the development of developing institutional mechanism for connecting businesses, people, and think tanks. So the Indo-Japan bilateral relations is very important for a multilateral project like AAGC, because skill development is something which India can learn from Japan, and language remains to be a barrier. I think there needs to be a greater push within the Indian student community to learn the Japanese language and a greater student exchange, so that there is a community among the upcoming generation policymakers who are trained in the language and also develop necessary skills to find space in an increasingly suffocating global environment. So this is a map of the Asia-Africa growth corridor. You had a look at a better map in the previous presentation. Thank you for that. Challenges for India: funding, obviously resources, we have a problem. Efficiency in implementation, Professor just pointed that out. There are structural problems which India needs to address. And talking about efficiency and addressing structural problems, I think we have a lot to gain once we acknowledge our drawbacks or setbacks. Once we accept that these are our weaknesses, that becomes a strength. So I think we need a different mindset towards where we lack and work accordingly. So that that way we are realistic about our goals, and policies and initiatives are not mere words on paper. Pro-China maritime neighborhood, Sri Lanka and Maldives, this is a challenge for us. And strong Chinese presence in Africa, that will be really difficult to penetrate. US policy towards Iran, Chabahar, which I already mentioned. And this is the final slide. This is my analysis. Expanding the scope of operations of the Quad. I spoke about that. Fast-track implementation of proposed naval bases in Mauritius and Seychelles. EU as a partner in AAGC. We can broaden the scope of Asia-Africa growth corridor, bring in more actors who are interested to join hands and make it a bigger initiative. Greater integration of think tanks and policy making in India for renewed maritime neighborhood policy. I think we lack, as a country, I feel we lack strategic culture. And I think the government should come out with a competition saying that whoever comes out with a renewed, redefined neighborhood policy will win a jackpot. I think something like that will really help. And deal with China. We cannot avoid China. They are breathing in, and You cannot avoid them completely, but while dealing, we should protect our interests. It shouldn't be a unilateral decision making. It should be more bilateral and multilateral decision making when we are dealing with China. And also increase Antarctic explorations and expeditions. Just let our Navy explore, let our vessels explore, let them roam around IOR. So that will also send a message across. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. I just want to make just a couple of points. One is, just to clear the confusion. Quadrilateral is different from, Malabar exercises. Yes. It's called quadrilateral security dialogue. That involves 4 countries, only dialogue. That's it. Malabar are naval exercises, basically between India and the USA, which started. Then it became 2007. Australia, Singapore, Japan joined, and that is it. We had 2 rounds of exercises. Then it was revived, and then Japan started participating since last year. So it's a trilateral Malabar exercises. That's it. Quadrilateral is entirely different. It's a security dialogue. Okay. And second is, Chahbar. We mentioned about, again, the Japanese have been, very, they said they wanted to join, then they withdrew. There was also concern about, American sanctions on Iraq. They exempted, of course, Chahbar. Japan again showed interest that maybe will join, but so far, Japan is not involved. India is pressing Japan to get involved in the, the second phase, especially. There are few other issues I thought, BELT and MSR probably should have concentrated more on MSR. BELT, if you really look at 1 trillion, whatever the money Chinese are going to spend, BELT component is less than 20-25%. Much of the money is going to be spent on the maritime, simply because 95% of Chinese trade, it flows through the oceanic resources. The major markets they're looking at, they have is in the coming years, especially after this issue with the USA, are going to be East Asia. Broadly, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia, and then extend it to Africa. These are going to be the really the big markets. All put together nearly 3/4 of global population. So these are still emerging markets. There's huge potential. So they have vested interest in developing infrastructure and connectivity. That really opens up huge markets for them as an alternative to EU and USA. That's why you can see, and of course, the globalization and if you really look at China's basic military structure is undergoing fundamental changes. They're drastically cutting manpower on the army front, and they're pumping in money into navy and air force to a lesser extent, but it's all maritime. So China, in a matter of 2 decades, has emerged as a major maritime power. This is the only navy in the world which is operating 1 carrier and already planning to launch the second one, launched already, maybe commissioned very soon. The third one is already in the pipeline. So they're going to have 3 carriers in the next 4 or 5 years. And there's all other big navies, they're scaling down. The carrier numbers are coming down. Europeans virtually stopped constructing. Russia has stopped constructing. USA is not adding. So the only 3 countries that are actually spending quite a bit on the navies are China, substantially higher, to a lesser extent India, and Japan. One has to really wait and see how helicopter carriers become real aircraft carriers and what kind of implications it will have on the new security agenda that Japan has ushered in. And Japan is one country that's undergoing absolutely remarkable, phenomenal change in terms of its security outlook and the way it's going to operate in the coming years. And okay, I don't want to go into details.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Myself, I'm going to be dealing with Japan's connectivity projects in the Indo-Pacific region. So my presentation is I'm going to look at, Japan's definition of Indo-Pacific and the connectivity projects that they have in the Indo-Pacific region. So I look at that narrative and the already well-established projects. Here I begin. I want to see the genesis of the concept. We've already discussed this concept at length here. So initially it started with Prime Minister Abe never, used the word Indo-Pacific. There were, relations to it in amalgamation of the 2 oceans, Pacific in 2007. Then former Foreign Minister of Japan, Taro Aso's speech, the 2007, Arc of Freedom and Prosperity in the Asian region. followed by Shinzo Abe's article on the democratic security diamond in 2012, which referred to the Quad. And then, if you look at it, Abe's speech on bounty of the open seas in Jakarta now, this is on where he particularly stresses on the free and open seas, wherein he wants to uphold the rule of law. There's a properly maritime-focused, approach on, Indo-Pacific. And then followed by the speech of peace and prosperity in 2014. Now, initially, when it came off, the initial conceptualization of it had a threat perception of China due to its maritime aggressiveness, in the region, and using it as a hedging strategy by partnering with like-minded states. Second, the maritime element is a significant element of the FOIP, where it had values of rules-based regional order and freedom of navigation. Now, hedging stance to lessen burden sharing, avoid entrapment and abandonment during a major struggle. Now, and also the focus was also on coalition through joint exercises, training, capacity building, and promoting regional interactions, and not merely being anti-China. Now, the significant change in the tone and the statements on Indo-Pacific has come through with the change in Abe's China policy. We have to look at that very closely. During Abe, when he made the first speech in the Indian Parliament in 2007, it was his first term. And then he went out of power, and there was another party called Democratic Party of Japan who came in power for a while. Then his re-election, and then you can see significant transformation of Abe's China policy. And now he has toned down the China threat narrative, and so that has, as a result, affected the conceptualization of Indo-Pacific. And the first statement on the usage of the term Indo-Pacific by Prime Minister Abe comes at the Tokyo International Conference on African Development in Nairobi, Kenya. That's in 2016. That's the first time he uses the term Indo-Pacific in his speech categorically. And then, and then followed by Japan's version of a free and open Indo-Pacific. It's not exclusive, and it's and all like-minded countries are free to join. Which is initially it had a threat narrative with particularly focusing on China, but now it is more it's more inclusive. As long as you are like-minded, you are free to join. And in 2018, this is the official sort of page from Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, where it categorically defines the Indo-Pacific region from Japan. You look at two big regions that pops out here. You look at two specific regions. One is the Asian region, which is primarily looking at the Eastern Seas and the Southeast Asian region, and then you can see the eastern coast of Africa as well, with the inclusion of Indian Ocean. Now, based on this, I will try to look at the connectivity projects that Japan has at the moment in the region. Now, what are Japan's connectivity projects in the Indo-Pacific, according to this? I would start focusing on Southeast Asia with the beginning, where it starts from the east, because Japan's engagements in Southeast Asia was it predated even China's infrastructure projects, and the big projects were formulated since the 1990s and has been the largest ever since. And the initial concept was to establish inter-regional connectivity by building economic corridors and to expand, to promote industrialization and regional integration. Now, the certain change in Japan's connectivity project comes after Japan's loss to China on Bandung high-speed railway track. That was in Indonesia. It was where they lost out to China, where China gave a preferential or cheaper loan. And then there were significant changes in the policies. In Feb 2018, where Shinzo Abe outlined a new aid strategy to employ Japanese aid through FOIP strategy and promoting high-quality infrastructure development. Now, he focused on high-quality infrastructure development and also with an amalgamation of maritime law enforcement, which would mean rules-based order and maintaining free and open seas. The other thing is, other biggest area of connectivity in Southeast Asia is the Mekong Connectivity Initiative, which began in 2016, which is supporting the east-west economic corridors, which begins at the Da Nang port in Vietnam and passes through all Laos, Thailand, and ends in Myanmar. And the second biggest connectivity project in the region is the Southern Economic Corridor, which starts at Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam and goes to Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and ends at the port of Dawei, which is located in southern Myanmar. And in South Asia, we have one big project called as the Bay of Bengal Industrial Growth Belt, also called as the Big B in short, in Bangladesh, where it is a basically JICA-led project where they intend on connecting the bridge between South and Southeast Asia in the hope of creating a better Asia, and also improving connectivity and interregional connectivity by also setting up deep sea ports as well. And in India, the investments has been there in Northeast India primarily to bolster India's Act East policy. Now that investment has been mostly on the highways now. It is, in Northeast India connectivity, NH 54 and 51 in Mizoram and Meghalaya respectively, which can be complementary to some of India's highway projects in with regards to Act East policy as the Kaladan multimodal project, as mentioned in the earlier presentation. Now this is a picture. You can see this is the east-west economic corridor on the north. Starts at Da Nang. And within this stretch, there is a lot of construction of bridges and highways at the same time. And it ends in on the west in Myanmar. It's in a place called Mo Lam Yaing. And the southern economic corridor starts at down there. I couldn't get the picture there. It starts at Ho Chi Minh City all the way to Phnom Penh, Bangkok, and ends in Dawei here. Now, this is just, I got a picture of this because JICA is involved, Japan International Cooperation Agency is involved extensively with the corridor or the connectivity projects in the region. Now, you look at the projects they have here, significantly focusing on the greater Mekong region, or so as the CLMV countries, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar. Significant highways, ports. Highways, I think the highest number of highways you have is in Vietnam. And then ports and special economic zones coming up in Myanmar at the moment. This is a picture of the Big B project, the Bay of Bengal Industrial Growth Belt that is planned in Bangladesh, where they focus on two ports, Paira Port, and then and Matarbari Port. Where they want to set up deep sea ports and also energy, LNG, liquefied LNG gas centers. So from where they want to also give energy, because Bangladesh as a nation is also, deprived of certain energy needs. So to provide energy to bolster that connectivity and to boost industrialization. Now, what is Japan's approach towards economic connectivity? I mean, like we mentioned all these big projects, right? So what is the basic, I found out their logic behind most of if you look at their map of their connectivity projects, what I can find is it is also based on the Pacific Belt Zone Grand Plan. In the 1960s, it was aimed at doubling national income within 10 years. This was in Japan. So this connectivity project started from northern Tokyo to southwestern Kyushu, through Osaka, where there were investments of infrastructure, development, connectivity, and also creation of industrial zones through high-speed railways like Shinkansen, and which ultimately led to the rapid economic growth of Japan. So now they usually follow this model again. The basic funda is this, and then they follow this same model on these other issues with certain modifications to it. This is the Japan's Pacific Belt. It's called as the Taiheiyo Belt. Taiheiyo basically means Pacific in Japanese. You can see up north, it starts in Tokyo, goes to Nagoya, Osaka, Hiroshima, and Fukuoka. Now, after having come from, Southeast Asia, I want to focus, and South Asia. So, since the earlier presenters have already focused on Asia, Africa, AAGC, Asia, Africa Growth Corridor, since it hasn't, there has been, proposals about it. Nothing concrete has been on the ground. So it appeared in 2016 and 17 as a vision document. Prior to 2016 and 17, all that was being said was, if you look at the joint statements, the three joint statements of, India and Japan, you can see that in the joint statements there were no mention of greater, collaboration in Africa at that point of time. That point of time, the biggest convergence was connecting the bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. How do we connect the bridge? And it comes out in 2016 and 17, the interest towards Africa and connecting Asia. So there are four main pillars, development and cooperation projects, quality infrastructure, and institutional connectivity. They focus on capacity, skill, and people-to-people partnership. Now, since they cannot compete with China in terms of money and financial, capacity, so what they're looking at is fostering people-centric sustainable growth, and they want to have multiple stakeholders and on the infrastructure development. And it's just not on, AAGC is simply not on, economic. It's not economic orientation is one of it, but it also has political and strategic orientation as well. This is by providing, giving an alternative to China's OBOR, which is called as transparent, high quality, and long timelines for the project, giving an alternative to the African nations. Is an alternative to China's projects, although it is more expensive but more reliable. So that is the bet that they're putting: high quality infrastructure. Now that brings us to the final question. When you look at these connectivity projects, what are the main drivers of these connectivity projects? Like, why is Japan engaging in all these regions, and for what purpose, to what ends? So Japan's drive, I think, is also to expand its economic base, because it's been suffering from its economic recession for many years. It has an ailing economy, and also they want a wider access to markets. And when you have these infrastructure projects, Japan they are also able to provide services as well as their materials as a result, where they can find a market, or can create a market of their own. So that becomes a big selling point. And second point is, you look at most of Japan's ODA strategy. If you look at it, it was initially based on to promote poverty alleviation and earn goodwill and trust post Second World War. But now, you can see it is also used as a diplomatic tool as well to earn goodwill. So now the third point is one of the most important points, is rivalry with China. When you look at the infrastructure projects of Japan, is it to do with compete with China? Well, initially there were concerns within Japan that that China is gaining ground in Southeast Asia and elsewhere, and taking over the economic market. So, but now the current administration's approach is that it has to be seen through a lens of competition as well as and balancing and cooperation on the other hand, because Japan realizes that they cannot compete with China on this infrastructure project. For instance, with the East and West Economic Corridor, if Japan is looking at the greater Mekong sub-region, like China has significant investments and influence in the CLMV countries. So if you're going to take on China, it may be very it may be on the losing side at the end of the day. So as a result, Japan has also changed its policy, and they have engaged with cooperation on this side. Now, and the other thing is, after Trump administration's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Japan, there was a vacuum created where America has no interest and where America gains nothing, and Japan had to take the leadership. And all ASEAN countries actually look up to Japan to take that leadership. And as a result, you can see Japan being engaged in this region. The last factor I would like to bring up is geopolitical tensions. Upholding is just not purely economic; it also has political implications, which is to uphold liberal international order, free and open market, and the rule of law, as well as with its geo-economic ambitions. Thank you.
Thanks, Gaurav. We have had 3 excellent presentations. Now the floor is open for comments, observations, or to pose questions. Please be brief so that we can accommodate as many as possible.
Mine. As we are discussing the connectivity, I would like to have your views, anybody, all 3 of you, that India and Japan. Now, Japan is good in customizing the projects in a very technically strong way, and the cost effectiveness can be done by India. So while we move to African countries, where we both are doing the projects. So how far the joint venture by India and Japan can give a sort of a boost in African countries having better par with Chinese. So is there any thought on that subject? Thank you.
Mine is on the transnational highway. What do you see? Being someone from the region, we see that though the government of India says that it is going to benefit the people of the region, we didn't see much that it's just a highway passing through your backward or frontward. It doesn't make much sense to us. So who is going to be the real beneficiary? Who is going to be real benefit out of this project? Second thing is that we speak of export. What are we going to export? The Indian, anything, majority of the things that is made in India is a very substandard. So we speak about export. What are we going to export? Thank you.
To his question, that Chandrali, she outlined a very impressive, scheme of development of infrastructure, but exactly what the gentleman here said, that will we be able to recover all this? Will we gain anything? Like Gaurav has said about Japan, that in the 60s they started the development and it has reaped great economic benefit. So will India be able to also get economic benefit from this? And who is footing the bills for all this? Is it just the Indian taxpayer? Like for the metro project, for the Shinkansen, Japan is substantially, chipping in. But for the rest of this, where are the funding coming from? And will it reap any economic benefits for India? All of them. Chandrali gave a very huge list of them, and we like he says that we are. It's just a highway, or is it actually going to add to the manufacturing hub?
Connectivity is more than just bridges and railways and whatnot. In fact, all of these countries in the regions are very well connected physically already. They're all on the Indo-Pacific. There's oceans, which is the most efficient ways of transporting. The lack of connectivity is in the cross-border regulations, tariff barriers. It's the lack of trade access. That's where the real barriers are. You can have all the bridges you like in the world, but if you can't sell your products in the other country and vice versa, you've just wasted your money on a bridge that people aren't going to use. So what's happening on actually getting real connectivity to allow people to trade across this region? And on that, to be controversial, because it's late in the day and will wake everybody up, the biggest lack of connectivity is between two regions that used to be one of the biggest trading areas in the world. What we currently know as Pakistan, and what we currently know as India. Almost zero trade. Is there any hope whatsoever in our lifetime that will return to what it's been for almost all of human history, which is a large trading area?
Answering to his question about what India is going to export and how these roads and railways and bridges are only roads and railways and bridges, and what is the significance of these infrastructure projects within India, I would answer is that India is trying to develop its industrial corridor, and through the Make in India initiative, it is trying to develop its Indian-based industries. Like there are many Indian-based industries which are present in these particular corridors, and the Indian-based products, be it defense industry, be it automobile or car industries. So in enhancing the infrastructure and enhancing the connection between these industrial regions through these roads and development, they are trying to build the economy and this would help in reducing the transport cost of the products, and it would help to take the export goods from one country to another. So this is the reason behind enhancing infrastructure within India. So this answering to his question. Who's footing the bill? Well, in my discussion, I've said Japan is investing in certain projects within India immensely. Other than that, India, in many of these sectors, India, for the port modernization project, India is looking for India. It has been estimated that India will be able to foot around. India has an infrastructural gap of 4.5 trillion US dollars, and India will be able to foot around 3.9. But for other than 3.9 trillion US dollars, but other than that, India is looking forward to the other multilateral banks, especially ADB and AIIB and National Infrastructure Investment Banks, to foot the bill for this for the infrastructure projects within India.
Yeah, and the question on India and Japan in Africa versus China, whether we can really compete with them. I think the problem starts with funding. When I say funding, it's not the availability of resource alone, but it also includes the terms and conditions under which funding is made available. And obviously, like looking at the foreign exchange reserve of China, like these countries, other countries, India doesn't have a deep pocket. So more the reason for a multilateral approach and creating financial mechanism similar to the ADB or the AIIB, and also trying to balance the compliance as well as the lending rates. So I think if that is addressed at the core, then other things should take care of itself, because most of the nations which are borrowing are only looking at money. So other things come secondary. Yeah.
Well, your question on trade barriers. Well, trade barriers and other issues, complications have always been there. I think since India or India and the neighboring ASEAN nations has had significant amount of talks with that. There are complications. I mean, this is something that will take a while to get over, because it's very bureaucratic. Takes a multiple level of talks, and generally doing. I mean, from what I've read and what I've come across, or by interacting with people, is that certain things in India can be transaction with India can be very, very complicated in terms of very bureaucratic, which might be very difficult for them to understand. As a result. So again, I think they're working on it. I mean, it's not like nothing is happening. There is work going on, obviously. Now, I'm not really updated on those particular details, so I cannot really give you particular aspects on. Yeah, and if your word on Pakistan, I'm not a Pakistan expert. I don't really focus on that area. Yeah, but I'll just give you a general opinion. I think, political tensions with the current administration is high. So as a result, I mean, there is very significant amount of, compared to the previous UP administration, with the current Modi administration, has become even lesser. And that is likely to continue, and I don't know how long that is going to go. So, thank you.
And the question on what are we going to export, the Sagarmala project and developing domestic port infrastructure. I believe there's a lot of FDI coming in the next 5 to 6 years. And even if it is not going to be indigenous industries which is going to manufacture and export, I believe there is going to be a tremendous amount of FDI coming in, and they will be exporting with India as a base. And if you look at the development of the growth story of China and India, there's a 13-year gap, namely 1979 and 1992. So I believe like India will definitely be the next China in terms of manufacturing. So
okay, I'll just add a couple of points. One is with regard to trade barriers. Really look at I mean, ever since WTO talks have been stuck for more than a decade now, Doha round is hardly making any progress. So the focus is shifting to regional arrangements. The regional arrangements phenomena is extensive in East Asia, Asia Pacific. The largest number of FTAs or RTAs, regional trading agreements, have been signed in this part of the world. The mega, trading, agreements like TPP, USA backed out, but FPTPP is already in operational. It came into being end of December. RCEP is being negotiated. Hopefully, this year it'll come through. Once RCEP and TPP and all the bilateral and multilateral FTAs come into being, the regional trade, intra-regional trade is going to go up. Already it's 58%, and thanks to the Trump and his America First policies, it will force Asian countries to trade themselves more. That will set off its own dynamics, geopolitical dynamics, more investments within the region, and all sorts of things are going to happen. So they are bound to break down. But there is generally accepted across the world, anyone who knows a little bit about development and economics, that trade is good for everyone. Okay, and it provides jobs and increases competitiveness of your goods, and all sorts of benefits are there with the trade. The more you do, and the trade contributes critically to economic development, which East Asia has proven. Okay, last 40 years. Ever Japan, thanks to Japan, which really pioneered the idea of export-led development and all that. So that's going to happen. India is forced to break down some of the barriers and reduce tariffs, and all that is happening already. So that I don't think is a major issue. It'll be nitty-gritties, domestic issues coming into being, all that will be there. But overall things are going to be far better in the coming years. You mentioned about Northeast exports. Probably one should be a bit realistic about Tri-Nation, express highway and its implications. So first thing is I'm not an expert on Northeast, but generally any road built, and especially highway, it contributes to economic development of that region. Okay, that's for sure. Okay, it's been scientifically proven, empirically proven that roads contribute to economic development. In the Northeast, the problem is that it's so cut off from the the rest of India. Neither it has got major natural resources, nor does it have critical mass of marketing. With 45 million, all the 7 northeastern states put together, it's too small a market and relatively underdeveloped. And much of India's industrial development or industrial corridors are in the West India and South India. So anybody wanting to export to say Thailand, he's not going to take his truck all the way, say from Andhra, Tamil Nadu, or Gujarat, go all the way to the Chicken Neck and go to Northeast and go to Myanmar and from Myanmar to Thailand. Put in a ship and you are there just by evening. Ship will reach one of the ports in Southeast Asia. That is going to be that's the reality. 97% of the global trade is by the sea, and especially in India's case, given limitations of Northeast in its location, okay, unless there is a corridor across Bangladesh, even then it's not going to be huge difference, but it can make some difference in terms of connecting at least Northeast to the main market. Northeast has to really develop its own indigenous whatever strength it has got either pineapples to orchids to one can think of any variety of agricultural products, and they're excellently good quality. That's what, and tourism, there's a huge potential. I don't know how many of you know that there is in Shillong there is autumn cherry blossom. Okay, the whole festival. The moment you say cherry blossom, you think of April in Japan, but there is Shillong, there are cherry blossom, trees, and you can enjoy them. So that is a huge potential in terms of tourism. So some of the most beautiful places are in Northeast. So that the trick is to develop apart from the roads, to develop other infrastructure, air connectivity, and hotels and all other things. So that can make huge difference. For Northeast. Anyway, well, let's not go into those kind of more details. And Pakistan, somebody mentioned Pakistan. I just want to make one point. If you really look at India's trade since 1947 onwards, India's trade with all the SAARC countries never exceeded 5%. Which means that for 95% of our trade, we have to look beyond South Asia. That's a fact. It's not going to change come what may. Even if Pakistan removes all the barriers, physical and non-tariff, everything else, there is a limitation. Okay, so that is not going to go away. That's a reality. We compete much more than complement with each other. That's there are issues about that. I just thought I'll make a point. Okay.
I have a question in the form of a comment. Actually, to anyone, and we would be the right person, I think, to answer also. Over the last few sessions, we are hearing Africa's Chinese presence in Africa. it seems to me a big hype actually. Entire Africa is not pro-basing at all. And for example, if you look at Djibouti, which is flashed so much and a lot of, talk about it, Djibouti is hosting facilities of America, Japan, France, and Saudi. And we have a plan to now connect to Djibouti, I think Jamnagar port in Gujarat, and even a lot of other African countries also, like Zanzibar, Mombasa, and all these places that India is going to connect now. So there are multiple players in Africa. It's not just China. It's a big hype, it seems to me. Your opinion on that? Thank you.
The point about Djibouti is there are multiple actors involved in Djibouti and holding stake in the port. But I came across several reports. I came across this McKinsey report which suggested that the Chinese are among the top 4 manufacturers and investors in Africa. And as you rightly pointed out, it's not all of Africa. It's in select few countries, and I think I've named those countries also, like especially in East Africa, because it's closer to the Indian Ocean coast. And just to clarify on that.
For instance, whoever has got 100 million, you have a place. You want. It's a reality. Anybody, even India tomorrow wants, some place, want to do what you want. 100 million, whatever the price, but roughly it's about 100 million. It seems you go develop, take one part of Djibouti and develop and have whatever you want to have. That is Djibouti. Everyone he mentioned. Everyone is there, including the Japanese and Chinese, Americans, the French and the Saudis. Only Indians are missing. Probably they don't have that kind of money. Anyway, so one should not overstate, the Chinese, the presence there. Okay. Secondly, about China's involvement. If you really look at, the Europeans who had been involved in Africa and whatever little development that took place for more than, last maybe 1.5 centuries. Much of it was give aid and get some little projects or put in some investments where in extractive industries and natural resources. It's the richest continent in terms of natural resources. But nobody ever bothered to develop 2 things. One is infrastructure. Nobody ever put. For the first time, Chinese are putting money in developing infrastructure. Trans-Africa Railway is one good example. And nobody ever bothered to open their markets for their products, which China is doing. The bilateral trade, which is 250 or 260 billion, is the largest in the last less than a decade. That's a good example. And so that's what exactly Africans have been saying. Please, we don't want aid. Please open your markets for our products. And please invest in our infrastructure. Okay, that's what China is doing. Okay, it is, of course, it is an issue about debt trap and high interest rates and blah blah all that. There are nearly 2 million ethnic Chinese working in Africa. That's an indication of Chinese involvement. It's massive. And nobody is going to really compete with China for the foreseeable future in terms of investments and infrastructure development and trade and other things. Nobody can match China. Okay, not anybody can send so many people, 2 million people, to work and from grocery stores to building railways to whatnot. That's absolutely it's amazing. Anyway,
just a quick comment on what are the benefits. Generally, whenever Japanese invest, there are very few projects which are not commercially viable. They become self-generating. You take Delhi Metro today. It's one of the most successful projects that is going on. Same is the case with India. We underestimate our strength. Yes, there are a couple of projects like Trilateral Highway or the Kaladan Multimodal Project which are still getting implemented. Take our connectivity projects in Nepal. Nepal census talks about how beneficial those connectivity projects were in Nepal in 1970s and 1980s and 1990s. So that tells a lot. Take Bhutan, for instance. A lot of our investment, there may be some criticism on that, but it has resulted in substantially higher per capita income for Bhutan. So even in our own neighborhood, the way we are doing things is different. We have a different approach. Japanese have a different approach. Our approach and Japanese approach are slightly more congruent, so therefore we come together compared to the Chinese. So that's, and our investments and Japanese investments are all driven by commerce. If the market is not available, then the project does not take off. The other problem with building infrastructure, which we are facing in whether it is in trilateral highway or Kaladan multimodal project, is if you don't have infrastructure, economic activity will not kick off. If you create infrastructure, you anticipate economic activity. So it's a chicken and egg situation sometimes. Sometimes it is our own country, so you have to take an initiative and build. That's what we are doing in some parts of the world. Some parts of India, you take initiative, build, hope it will kickstart. But as Professor Naidu pointed out, in large parts of India, when the moment infrastructure has been created, it's not only economic activity, social conflicts have been addressed. There are examples, we can go into it later. This Naxalism in central part of India, substantially to a large extent, the communist guerrilla movement has been addressed also because of improvement of road facilities. So those are some of the things. On Pakistan, for instance, yes, we would like to have connectivity across into Afghanistan and Central Asia, but for all practical purposes, there is a sanction on India moving in that sense. If you use the word sanctions, then it's a different thing. There is still trade happening. $2 billion worth of trade is happening. A lot of it is getting routed through a third country. But the challenge with some of the Indian neighbors, if you get into their shoes, is that we are such a big economy. They already have a trade deficit with India, huge trade deficit. So what does having greater trade with India mean? More greater deficit with India. And to add to the complexity, most of these nation states are going through nation building exercise, most of these countries. And there is a significant Indian presence or cultural presence of India. Sri Lanka has large Tamil population. Bangladesh, or for that matter, Nepal, for that matter. This cultural congruence or presence is there of Indian ethnic communities. So greater economic engagement also means greater cultural interactions across the space. So there will be reluctance. So we need to understand that dynamic as well. Thank you.
If I could make a comment on the comment. It's a very good point about India building its own infrastructure. For many years working for the Australian government and then representing it on the World Bank, I've had senior people from India saying, why won't somebody come and build our infrastructure? And I've given very diplomatic responses, but to translate my diplomatic responses, my answer has always been, why doesn't India build Indian infrastructure? India is a very big economy, but the Indian government for decades now chooses to tax at a very light rate. It's between 11 and 14% of GDP, depending on how you measure it. Australia is a very efficient taxer, so it's 25% of GDP. Europe, America, it's more like 50% of GDP gets taken in tax and used to build infrastructure. India chooses to tax at 11 to 14% of the GDP and says, why doesn't Australia or Japan or the World Bank or somebody build our infrastructure for us?
My question is to Gaurav. In your absolute conclusion, the very last point, you mentioned that India could develop Antarctica. And so may I ask the basis for that? I think the very last point in your conclusion.
I don't see Antarctica here. Oh, the same, I think.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So that I thought that was very interesting. Is it like just more scientific or exploration? Is it related to climate change, the importance of that?
Exploration and more scientific.
Or economic benefit?
No, just for exploration and scientific purposes. I think like we should make our vessels float around the IOR as much as possible. So that sends a message across. So it's just some absurd out-of-the-box thinking, like trying to find ways so that we can gain some kind of influence or foothold in the IOR. So,
no, not absurd at all. I think it's very relevant. And as far as climate change, I mean, it's not been reflected on today because possibly it's not part of it. But 17% of Bangladesh is now underwater. And there's a huge migration of Bangladeshis, mainly to their own capital, but I presume also to India. So it can be a burden to India. So I think climate change is something we need to reflect on. So that's my curiosity for this question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Intervention on that Antarctica issue. It's a global common. You can't go and intervene militarily or whatever. You can't do it. Only thing you can go for scientific experiment with collaboration with others. And we are already doing it since many decades we are doing it. Gangotri, a lot of things we are doing. Rather, we have many times behaved like a rescuer for other expedition teams trapped there. Many times we have rescued the Russians. So many times we have done. We are doing it already. Beyond that, you cannot do because there is a treaty for it. There is a convention at the international level which protects that part of the field. You can't go beyond. For natural resources, right now it's not possible at all. Yeah.
Not for natural resources. I mean for more scientific.
We are already into it and we are doing it. We are already doing it in a more big way.
In fact, I think we also have this pioneer status in some 15,000 square kilometer.
No, that's in Central Indian Ocean.
Okay. And just to add up on the Pakistan point, before we wrap up, I think we are in Delhi and people talk about Pakistan enough. And coming from Chennai, I'm happy Delhi speaking about peninsular India and maritime issues. So let's stick to that. Thank you.
On the Antarctica issue, the Antarctic Treaty is actually easily droppable, and every country is just there for exploration purposes. I've visited the Chinese department that's responsible for scientific research in Antarctica. All their walls are covered with maps of where the resources are to be found in Antarctica, where the oil is, where the coal is, where the iron is. They must have a particular scientific interest in that, or like every other country.
Rather, what I think now today, there is a competition unfolding in Arctic region. China has unveiled its latest Arctic policy. Russia is there. And that is actually who is the most attractive. Exactly. That's the most attractive geopolitics going on there. Rather, India should look for it.
Let's give them a big hand, please, for their presentation. And thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Looking forward to see you tomorrow morning here at 10 a.m. For the second day of the sessions. We will conclude with lunch tomorrow. Thank you. We have some interesting sessions tomorrow. Looking forward to your presence.